today we're going to talk about hagalah. Hagalah is one of the ways that we kosher things. It's the most common way that people kosher things. We use boiling water. And just as a way of introduction, most people, when they think about hagalah, they say, hagalah, I know everything about hagalah. You boil up water and you dunk the things in and you're in business. Everything's done. Okay, so it is in fact pretty straightforward. And we're going to talk about some of the exceptions or some of the more unusual parts, a little more complicated parts. And just as a good example of complications that can come up that are worth understanding, if we get to really what we want to, is that for our demonstration we're going to we have a pot of water here boiling. This pot is boiling on an induction heater. There's actually quite a shiloh whether we could kosher in water that boiled in an induction heater.
What is an induction heater?
It's a special kind of heater. There isn't an electric coil there. It does it by exciting the electrical molecules in the pot. And without a pot in there, the surface is not hot. So it's a special kind of heater. So you might look at it and say, well, I'm just going to dunk the water into it. In fact, it's quite a question whether you're allowed to kosher in water heated up by an induction heater. So I mention it just because there are quite a number of variables and complications to koshering. So we're going to talk about a lot of the common things that we do, but if something's unusual, it's always worth asking to find what it is. Okay. And what we're going to talk about, we're going to divide into 5 parts. There's sort of 5 parts we have to do for doing hagalah, and they are first, to decide if hagalah is appropriate. That's the right thing to do. The second is to clean what you're about to use. We're going to spend a good amount of our time, and a lot of our examples here have to do with that. Next is it has to be in a immersion. You don't use it for 24 hours. Third is it comes into contact with the boiling water, and last is you rinse it off. Okay, we're going to go through those 5 parts one at a time to see what we have to know about koshering with boiling water. Okay, the first is deciding if you should use hagalah. Okay, and there are some things that need less than hagalah. They just need to be wiped down, like your refrigerator shelves and things like that only had cold contact. An exception to that, just for cold, is if liquid stayed in a container for a long time, for more than 24 hours, that needs to be kosher with hagalah also. Okay, that's called covers, needs 24 hours.
No, can we say covers is only usually a liquid, right?
Correct.
So let's say a frozen liquid.
It's a very good question.
Less than 24 hours.
It's a good question. Not for today. It's a good question. Okay, but that's a good question. There's an opposite extreme. Things that need much more koshering than hagalah. Those are things that need some form of libun. Your stove, your oven, toaster, a hot plate, a lot of things like that. Warming drawer. Those things need something more than hagalah, and we couldn't do hagalah with that. So if someone wanted to kosher their toaster, they wouldn't dunk the toaster into boiling water or parts of the toaster into boiling water because that's not good enough. Okay, you need to do a better kosher. Okay, we're just dealing with the hagalah, and the general rule is as follows: if something was in contact with food and the fire without any liquid in between them, then you need to do libun. So the toaster, the reason why it needs a better kosher is because the food sits in the toaster without any liquid in between them, and it needs to have hagalah. Everything else, you have a spoon and a fork, you put them with liquids, or you have a pot, you use it with liquids, that could be kosher with hagalah. What happens if you have something in between? Let's say you have a frying pan you use with a little bit of liquid. Let's say you have a spatula that you sort of use it on the fire, it's sort of not on the fire. Okay, that's not for today. That's a shiloh that's worth thinking about. But we're talking about things that are just used either off the fire or used on the fire with liquids. That's what needs hagalah. Okay. In deciding whether you can do hagalah, the next thing to think about is which materials are suitable for hagalah. Certain materials can or cannot be kosher with hagalah. So the Torah tells us you can do all kinds of metals, cast iron and stainless steel and copper. All kinds of metals can be kosher with hagalah. The Torah also says you can kosher certain things with hagalah, and those are, the general rule is cheres. So this coffee mug is ceramic. Okay, you can't kosher that with hagalah, as is this crock pot. This insert for a crock pot is also made of cheres. So even though you only use it with liquid, or use the coffee mug only with liquid, you can't kosher it with hagalah because it's made out of cheres, which can't be kosher. Other examples besides these are, other examples would be if someone has, not so common anymore, but a porcelain dishwasher or sink, a piece of china, or it's come a little in style to have counters that are made out of cement. Those are all materials that can't be kosher. They're all forms of cheres. And hagalah doesn't work for any of those things. Now, as we continue, the poskim speak out that you can kosher things made out of stone or wood. So a stone counter, a granite counter, let's say, that's something that can be kosher. It's made out of stone, or you have a bowl that's made out of wood. From the perspective of the material, you could do hagalah with that. There's a shiloh in the poskim as to whether you can kasher something made out of glass. The Ashkenazim have the custom to be machmir. We don't kasher things made out of glass. And therefore, anything, I don't know if I have any examples here, but things that are made out of glass, let's say you have the cover of a pot or a Pyrex dish or a drinking glass or Corel, those are all made out of glass. Those can't be kasher. You can't kasher those with hagalah. As an aside, your oven in your house, most ovens at home are coated with a material called porcelain enamel, which is a glass coating on the inside of your oven. It doesn't look like glass, but in fact it is. There's actually a door made out of glass in your oven. The door is made out of glass. And why we're allowed to kasher ovens where we do is not for now, because that's not kasher with hagalah. If that was kasher with hagalah, we'd have more of a question. Okay. Now the one last material to talk about is our synthetic materials. That's the really contemporary place we can talk about that over the past maybe 50, 75 years, which is, it's not any of the materials that are the natural materials. It's not stone or ceramic, none of these natural, it's something, so we call it synthetic. And there's differences of opinion. The CRC's position is that we're makel, we allow the kashering of plastics. And therefore, if you have a stone counter, but it has a seal on it that's made out of a synthetic sealant, the CRC would allow you to kasher that. Other people disagree and say, no, you can't kasher them. Or the same would go if you had a Korean sink, or you have a Formica counter, or you have a plastic bowl. The CRC would feel that you could kasher that, and others would disagree and say, since it's synthetic, you're not allowed to kasher. Okay, so now we've decided that we're ready to, we've done the first piece, we're ready, we decided that hagalah is appropriate for what I'm trying to kasher. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure we get all the residue off. We have to clean it off, that there's no residue on it. Okay? And that has a whole bunch of applications. So, for example, in an oven, and I know ovens don't get kashered with hagalah, but we need to clean them also. If you have an oven that's not self-clean, that doesn't self-clean, then it's quite a job to make sure that it's really clean. To really scrub it off and make it that there's nothing left on it is quite a job. That's not an easy thing to do to get it clean. Okay? Or you have forks. So the between the prongs of a fork is a place that you have to clean carefully because food gets stuck into there, and you want to make sure that in fact that it's clean. Okay. Another issue is that as part of cleaning is you want to make sure that the water will be able to come in contact with the utensil. So if there's rust on it, or there's some other buildup, let's say like a calcium buildup on the utensil, you can't kasher it. Okay, so you look something over just to see that there's nothing on it that would block the water from touching the kli. In that regard, if it's discolored, that's okay. We only can't kasher something that has an actual physical buildup that you would feel it if you rubbed your finger over it. But if it's just a discoloration, that's okay. Okay. Next is we don't kasher things. We can't kasher things that have small holes in them. Things that have tiny little holes in them where food could get caught and it's really, really difficult to clean, those things can't be kashered because we're never sure that we got all the actual food out of it. Okay? So this is a piece from a dishwasher. This is we put the silverware in the dishwasher. Okay, this to try to get all the food out of all these little cracks and crevices in here, and there are other ones. Dishwashers have lots of cracks and crevices in them. It's really impossible, and that's why we tell people for Pesach we don't let them kasher. We don't recommend kashering dishwashers for that reason, because they're so difficult to get all the food in, all the pieces out of it. Okay. There's some other things here that have the same kind of thing. Here, this is the drain on the bottom.
Why can't they just change that?
They could. Oh, you're right. That's
Right.
If that was the only question, we could just change that piece. But the racks that the dishes sit on also have difficulty, and the drain on the bottom, there's a drain cover. There's lots of pieces that have it. Right, that's just one example. On the bottom of your sink, people have some kind of strainer usually on the bottom of it. There's a little aerator that fits around the faucet. Okay, these are all things that have tiny little holes in them. If you look at them, you see lots of holes. There's a splatter screen and different kinds of colanders. That these are too hard to clean. And therefore, even if a person says, I'm willing to go and make an effort to clean them out, we say you cannot kasher them because they're too difficult to get them clean. Okay, I don't have one here, but the same would apply. The same would apply to a slotted spoon or anything else that has those kind of small holes, etc. Okay. Next of the things that can't be kasher, which is very similar to what I just mentioned, just a drop different, is something that's got cracks and crevices in it. Okay, it doesn't have a hole, but it doesn't have little holes, but it's got cracks and crevices. So if you look at this vegetable chopper, okay, so it's very similar to the other things, it's just a little different. I mean, here you can even see it. This is actually not clean very well. That's got all kinds of food left in it, and it's because it's difficult. Think about these little holes in it, trying to get all that perfectly clean out of here. That's not easy enough, and because it's so difficult, you're not allowed to kasher. That's some more examples here. Here's a little brush. Here's a can opener. Okay, that if you looked at it carefully, you would see there's so many little places where food can get stuck in here that it's just hopeless. Okay, you're not going to be able to kasher these things. There's too many places where food can get trapped, and therefore, when you're deciding if you can kasher, you look, you say, you know what? And this electric knife, I didn't bring the blades, but there's a big hole over here, and there are spaces on the place on the side where food can get caught. We wouldn't kasher those. This basket is not here just to hold it. This is an example, actually, in the din of a wicker basket that has cracks and crevices that food gets stuck in that you can't kasher. Okay, now. When we look at knives, there are two different. Basically, we're going to call them two different kinds of knives. There are knives that the handle is made of just one solid piece, and in those knives, actually in this case, there's a little food stuck in there, but you could clean that. But no food would get stuck in between the blade and the handle because it's just one piece. It's one blade surrounded completely by the handle, as opposed to a knife like this, where the handle is really made of two pieces, and the handle is screwed on or attached together. And there, if you were to bend this knife, as you bend the knife like that, you're not going to break it, but you'll see that a crack opens up where food can get stuck into it. If you do that to this, if you bend the knife like this knife, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to, there's no space that opens up because it's one solid piece. If you pull this one open, this one will actually have to be pretty tight. But if you pull it open, you'll see there's a place where food can get stuck. And that's an example of something that can't be kasher because of these small places.
You'll be able to see.
You would see a crack open up.
No, you could see like if it's made from one or two pieces?
Yeah, you could see, but by bending it, you'll know also whether there's a place for food to get stuck into the in between.
Yeah, we'll pass the
Okay.
guys around carefully.
People who wear braces, children who wear braces have a particular problem with this because if you think about braces, it's a million little cracks and crevices. Okay, so good news is that obviously they're not going to take out the braces or drink out of a straw for the whole place up. So what they do is
their mouth and do not eat for 24 hours.
no. What they
Bleach.
do is I'm sorry I couldn't find mine at home, but there's something called a proxa brush, Proxa, proxa brush, and it's actually meant for cleaning out braces. Imagine if this was a tenth of the size. Okay, it's a tiny little bristle brush like this on a little head. The whole thing is this big and it's very thin, and it's meant exactly for that to go in between the cracks in your braces. And if you're patient and you're willing to sit and go through it, sit on Erev Pesach in the morning, sit and go through it piece by piece of the braces, and you can get them clean. And that's what you have to do. In that case, you can't take it out. You don't have a choice, and that's what you have to do to clean it out. The same applies to utensils that got scratched up or cut up. A person has a butcher block. Okay, so they're constantly cutting on it. Or they have a plastic, well, we talked that you could kasher plastic, but lots of times the plastic gets scratched up and nicked and cracked. Those are places where food can get stuck, and because of that, you can't kasher those things. Not because the material is suitable for kashering, and hagalah is the right thing to do, but we couldn't get it clean. We couldn't get all the food out of it, therefore we couldn't do it. Okay. Last for this section is, some items have a narrow neck to them, and because of that, it's impossible to really get inside and clean it out. Okay? First, we'll talk about, so in this tea pitcher, actually you couldn't kasher because it's ceramic. We mentioned before that if something is China, you wouldn't kasher because it's made out of ceramic. It's a material that can't be get hagalah. But ignore that part of it. Excuse me. This neck over here is something where nobody could reach inside of it and clean it properly. So we'll never know that we really got all the food out of there from the inside of that.
Okay,
Well,
you
use
put
the bottle
a brush in there,
With the bottle
and then
brush.
pour water
It
through
would-
it
it
and see
would-
if it comes clear?
It would depend on the
The
situation.
problem is they got little holes in there too.
On the inside, there's also little holes. So
I noticed that.
It depends on the situation. Okay, and every
Is this shear right now for Pesach the whole year, both?
it's a very good
Right.
question. It's a very good question. The
Like
rules are
China,
like,
for example,
the
would be
rule-
a difference.
well, China we don't kasher all year round. That's clear.
Unless it's expensive.
Well,
Okay, for people with special situations, just put that on the side. Well, that's a
It's up for the
special question to
state.
ask a rabbi if you have a special situation. But
Right.
the rules of cleaning, of preparing the thing, the rules of kashering are all in public space.
Yeah.
All the rules of kashering are in public space. So the rules where it talks about what happens if there are small cracks and crevices and these kind of things.
Right.
There, the Ramah is more machmer. The Ashkenazim are more machmer than the Sephardim are. And there's a question: did the Ramah mean to only be machmer for Pesach, or was he machmer for all year round? And the reason to think he would be more machmer is for the following reason: if I left a tiny bit of chametz in that hole over here, okay, so there's something called bittul. If there's so little left, then we wouldn't worry about it. So for year round, if there's something treif in there, that would not be as serious as on Pesach. Because on Pesach we know that chametz is asher b'mashru. So on Pesach, if I poured tea through this thing and there was even a tiny bit in there, it would be more serious than during the year. So it's a question: was the Ramah being extra machmir just because it was Pesach? Because he's afraid you're going to actually use it on Pesach or not? It's a question. As a rule, we assume that that he needs it for all year round, but we're more tolerant or accepting for year round than we are for Pesach. For Pesach, for something that someone's going to actually use on Pesach. So when you have other kinds of bottles like this, you have to judge them. Okay, you have to look at each one and decide, is the hole too big or not too big? You have a baby bottle, so most of the bottle can get clean. But if you think about it, this part over here is really difficult to clean. So you'll have to. Each one has to be looked at to say, is this kind of a bottle that you could open or you can clean or you can't? Okay. We now move on to the third section. We decided we should do hagalah, and it's appropriate to do hagalah to this utensil. And it's all clean. Okay, the next step is that it should be ein b'yomim. You can't use it for 24 hours. What's the reason why you can't use it for 24 hours beforehand? The reason is very simple. If you're gonna kasher, let's say we take this fork and it was used for something treif or for chametz, and we put it into boiling water. All the flavor, the treif flavor is gonna come out of the fork. Then what's gonna happen? It's gonna go right back into the fork. Okay? It went out of the fork, it's sitting in hot water, it's gonna go right back into the fork. So what did we gain? So by letting it sit for 24 hours beforehand, that takes care of that problem. It makes it, we don't have to worry that the flavor that comes out will go back in for whatever reason. Once it's 24 hours, we don't have to worry about that. Okay, now, that plays a special role when it comes to Pesach. And that is as follows. Those rules about not using something for 24 hours don't work on Pesach. It only works before Pesach. And for that reason, you can't do hagalah on Pesach. Because on Pesach, even if you wait for 24 hours, you didn't get that special thing called that is ein b'yomim, so you cannot do hagalah on Pesach. There are other ways of kashering on Pesach, but on Pesach you cannot kasher from chametz. If your fork became treif, you could kasher. But if you have a chametz, we forgot about that silverware. We want to kasher the silverware. We want to kasher the silverware. We realize we need some extra pieces. You can't do hagalah for it on Pesach. Okay? You could, if it became treif, you could kasher. But if it became chametzik or was chametzik from before Pesach, you can't kasher. You can't do hagalah on Pesach.
Oh.
From milchik suflations?
From
Milchik suflations on Pesach you could do?
if it wasn't chametzik,
Right.
then you're just kashering it from treif or milk. Those are regular rules. But if you're kashering it because it was chametzik, that you can't go Pesach. Okay. Because of this rule that things have to be ein b'yomim, the most common time that people kasher is right after Shabbos or on Sunday morning, because basically you don't use things for the whole Shabbos except for a few things, but most of your stuff doesn't get used. So that's why it's pretty common for people to kasher on Motzei Shabbos or Sunday. And last about this is that when we kasher something, the pot that we use for the kashering does not need to be a Pesach pot. All it needs to be a pot that's clean and that itself has not been used for 24 hours. And then we could use a chametz pot or a fleshik pot of milk. It doesn't make a difference. As long as it's clean and has been used for 24 hours, then we could use it. Okay, now we're up to what most people think of in kashering, which is putting it into the boiling water. Okay, when we kasher with water that's at a rolling boil. Okay, for those of you who missed the beginning, it's a question whether actually you can kasher in an induction heater. So we're doing it on that. We're acting as if you're allowed to do that. It's actually a question whether you're allowed to. For those who missed the beginning. Okay. So the water has to be a rolling boil, and you see that what just happened, which is, we're going to say about it again, which is the water loses its temperature pretty quickly. We uncover the pot, we can easily lose our rolling boil, okay? And we're going to see that as we go on, okay? Now, the rule is you don't need to submerge the whole item at once. If something is very large, you could do one side and then the other side, okay? I don't have it the right size here, but you could do one side and the other side. You might do that if you were kashering the cover. You could do just one side at a time, or fit into a bigger pot. You could do that one side at a time. That was pretty hot. If you actually kashering the pot, what you would do is, let me cover this back up so we could use it in a second. If you actually kasher the pot, what you would do is, if you want to kasher the pot, you need to not just kasher the inside, but also overflow the water. And what you would do for that is, you would get a smaller pot. You would put that on another fire, a small saucepan on another fire. And when you were ready, when both pots had come to a boil, you would pick up the sauce pot. You would pick up the saucepan, submerge it into the pot into this pot, and that would cause the water to overflow. So by that way, you'd be covering the, of course, inside, and all the overflows.
Hot work.
Okay, what?
Hot work.
hot brick. Yeah, we don't do that. This is more practical. Okay, as with this, and we're going to say it again as a future. When we're dealing with boiling water, you have to be careful. We don't want to hurt ourselves while we're doing this. So you have to be very careful and cautious, and the kids can watch from a little distance. Okay. So the simple way we kosher things in boiling water is we put up a pot of water to boil, and we put things into it. Okay. So let's see if our water's come to a boil. Yeah. Come back to a boil. Okay. Our water's at a boil over here, and we just put the dishes in. Okay. Now, when we do that, we have to put the dishes in. We have to put the dishes in one at a time, and the reason is because one of the rules of kashering is that all the parts have to come into contact with the water. So if I dunk in 2 spoons like this, I have to be concerned that they're going to be touching each other, and they're not going to get kosher. And for that same reason, I can't put them in while I'm holding them in a tongs. You might want to, so you don't lose it or you don't drop it in. So you can't. This doesn't hold very well. Okay. You can't do it holding on with the tongs because then there's a part that with the tongs. This doesn't work. Where it holds on to it, that you would lose. You're not getting contact. Okay, I'm sorry.
Take 3.
Where it doesn't come in contact with the water, and for that reason, in that spot, you can't hold it with tongs when you're koshering.
You shouldn't leave it in the water, honestly.
What do you say?
You shouldn't leave it in the water.
Because? No, we can talk about that. Yes, there's no thing. You can leave it. Okay. So yes.
Can you just drop a can in the mixer?
So that's a good question. Could you? Some people want to do is they'll take a whole handful of silverware and throw them in, and then shake it around. Okay. It's really a toss-up whether that works, because if you throw in so many of them, when I shake it up, am I sure that everyone's going to come in contact with the water? So depends how confident you are or overconfident you are that that's going to work. We kosher when we do the koshering at our Pesach fair. We throw this silverware in one at a time. Not everybody does it that way. Okay, now what happens is, okay, back to where we were. If you throw in silverware, if I kept throwing these in, we would lose our temperature. Actually, the water's not so hot. That's what it is. We lose it. We have a nice boil here. You can see the bubbles coming up. If we threw in too many of them, it would well, I mean, it's obvious. The water's however hot it is, and the silverware is colder. So we keep throwing them in. Oops, sorry. Shouldn't splash like that. Don't do what I just did. Put them in more gently. But if we put them in eventually, we're going to lose temperature, and we're going to have to wait for the water to come back to a boil. Okay, before we put in other things, we have to wait for the water to come back to a boil. Now, when we do this on a counter or a sink, there we don't kosher. We obviously don't bring the whole sink up to a boil. Okay. So what we do is, in those cases, we kosher not by putting the utensil into the boiling water, but by pouring the boiling water onto the area. Okay, we're not going to do that here live. Okay, but when you do that, if you do pour the boiling water, it's important that the water come straight from the pot onto each area. And you don't want to do is to just splash it across and then it just rolls across the whole counter. You have to carefully try to hit every spot with water straight from the pot. Takes a little practice, and it's very. There's a lot of hot water spilling every place. You have to be extra careful that you don't hurt yourself. Okay, some people do it with a kettle, with a little urn, but however you do, you have to do it very carefully. When we do that at my house, we put towels on the floor, catch some of the water, and the kids stay nice and far away. But you don't want to hurt anybody. While you're doing this, you have to be extra careful. Okay, now, one way that people think of koshering counters is a more modern method, which is to use a steam cleaner. Okay, steam cleaners are they're not meant for koshering. They're built for cleaning, and they are different kinds of devices that they take water and instead of it boils the water up and gives you out a spray of steam out of it. Okay, and it's really meant. There are all kinds of attachments that come with this that are used for cleaning items. Okay, it's not meant for koshering, of course not. It's meant for cleaning, and you have all different kinds of ways that with pieces that help you clean them. Now, sometimes these are great for koshering, but there are 2 rules for koshering that are important to know about these, and they are: first of all, we can only kosher with water. We don't kosher with steam. So if we were to just point this at this, I tried this before. If you put this into a cup, you could spray this in here all day. We're not getting any water. All we're doing is getting lots of steam onto the surface. We're not getting. Okay, so now unless we leave it for long enough. Okay, if you could see close enough, you would see that water is beginning to form. It's condensing. Okay, so either we could let it sit till the water condenses on the surfaces, or some of them that are adjustable, we could adjust the temperature so what's coming out is actually water instead of steam, and it's boiling it up. But the way it's coming out is water. If we did that, we would be okay. From that perspective, we need to get water.
Would it get hot enough?
And the second is that we have to kosher with water that's boiling. So if we spray it on and the water that's in this cup is not coming out as boiling, the water is just warm, it's not boiling, we didn't do a good enough job. So my chances are that this one, whatever, this little one that over here is not going to do the trick. Commercially, in a bigger kitchen, where someone has a better system, we went last week or 2 weeks ago to kasher a facility, and they had one that could do it. It was a commercial unit, and they could kasher with boiling water. It could be done appropriately. We could get boiling water coming out of it. We could get water to come out of it at the right temperatures, and it could do the trick. But that depends on what
At
you
what
have.
temperature does the minimum?
It has to be boiling temperature.
212?
Yeah, 212. Okay. You would see. You could use your little thermometer if you want to. If you want to use a little meat thermometer. Meat thermometer. But the idea is you have to get boiling water. So sometimes the steam cleaners will help. For sure, the steam cleaners are great for cleaning. Okay, we talked about before, and you have to get it cleaned. That's for sure good for that. Okay. Now the final step we have for kashering is there's a minhag that after we kasher something, we put it into cold water. And so for that, if I could, I don't know if these tongues are going to work.
Those tongs, if you were kashering, they should be in the binyam as well, right?
Yes, anything that has to do with kashering would have to be
Glasses too?
not. You don't have to take
Then why you take them off?
I can't see. Only if you want it, everything you kasher used for kashering has to have not been used for 24 hours to be clean. I don't know if I'm going to be effective at this one. I'm going to try.
Put your hands in.
Thank you. And we just dunk it into water, and that's the end of the kasher.
Is it maca?
It's a minhag to do it. No, it's not market if you didn't do it.
Important to
Now,
know.
what happens if you have
Okay.
milk again, inflation, a milking pot? Can you kasher inflation?
Yes, I thought I mentioned that. Doesn't make
24
any difference.
hours.
As long as it's clean and not been used for 24 hours, you can mix and match whatever you want. Okay, thank you everybody for coming to my show and tell today.
You like